Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Priority Sale webinar series. We are thrilled to have you join us for today's session, the 3 most important steps your sales team is missing. In this session, we'll uncover the foundational elements that make the priority sale approach so impactful, and we'll share actionable insights you can apply immediately to elevate your sales strategy. Kristen will start us off with a quick recap of our first session, and then we'll dive right into today's topic with Brian and Kristen leading the way. Let's get started. Kristen, over to you.
Well, thank you to all of our participants in the first webinar, where we discussed one of the toughest challenges that sales teams face today, protecting and expanding margins. We shared how the 3 deadly C's, commoditization, compressed selling time, and consensus decision-making, are driving a race to the bottom on price. We also discussed the concepts of above and below the line margin. When businesses are operating at the lean line with no more room to cut in operational expense, margin must be won in the sales process. In the 2 moments of truth that we learned about, sellers must be able to defend your margin by answering the question, why you, and communicating your real impact. They need to convince the seller that your solution is unique and worth more than your competitors. To start a buying journey, sellers must reach higher level prospects and be able to answer the questions, why this, why now, and why you, to become a priority. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. Our topic today is the 3 most important steps your sales team is missing, where we'll dive into the priority sale methodology and reveal the essential ingredients to creating the priority pitch. These 3 essentials, approach, tools, and skills, are the backbone of making your sales team stand out and ensuring that your message resonates with prospects on a deep, instinctual level. Without all 3 ingredients working together, it's impossible to create the kind of impact that makes you a priority in the buyer's mind. We'll start with a fascinating look into how the human brain makes decisions, as Brian Gray from Revenue Path Groups introduces the neuroscience behind why the priority sale approach works. Then Kristen Westberg of the Rev Collective will walk us through how sellers can use this knowledge to craft an effective priority pitch that resonates with the prospect's primal decision-making processes. We'll also cover the tools that sellers need to start a buying journey and how to assess and build the specific skills that make the priority sale approach successful. And finally, we'll be introducing the Priority Pitch Challenge. So we invite you to bring this challenge to your teams and have them answer. And we'll go over that at the end. Brian, let's get started today with a lesson in neuroscience.
Wow. Yeah.
How does the human brain make decisions?
Yeah, and thank you, Ari. And thank you, Kristen, for today. Why this is important is that Kristen laid out a second ago on the procurement moment of truth and the priority moment of truth. And as we talked last time, the priority moment of truth is where we can achieve much greater margin and much greater value for our prospects. But to do that, we have to understand who our prospect truly is, right? Because we're not selling to hearts and souls and arms and legs, my friends. We are trying to win over and persuade a 3-pound organ called the brain that you're the most amazing thing to ever come along, and I need to act right now, right? Now, while the brain is a very complex and fascinating organ, it's a very primitive and predictable decision maker. It makes decisions the same way every time. And what we have found is that sellers and sales teams relentlessly have no idea how the brain even makes a buying decision. And it usually shows up in the reasons they give or how they try to introduce themselves to strangers. To start, there are 2 parts of the brain. We have the rational brain and the primitive brain. Both brains are necessary, but decision-making happens at the primitive brain level. In fact, 90% of all decisions start at the primitive brain level. We only rationalize and use the rational brain once we've actually already made a decision. 2 brains, 1 drives decisions. The primitive brain is insanely focused on making my threats, both physical and social, go away. The disconnect or the problem here is that too many sellers try to win the rational brain, whereas the primitive brain is the brain that actually makes the decision. So let's talk about this primitive brain. It is, in fact, where we identify our threats. It's where decisions begin, but most importantly, it's where priority is born. And what we believe is that priorities are nothing more, nothing less, nothing more than commitments to make my threats go away. Of all the good and great ideas out there, I'm only going to act on so few of them, and the only ones I'm going to act on will be my priorities, which are commitments to make my threats go away. So why do threats matter? This isn't about selling to fears. This is about selling to threats. Threats either exist or they don't. So why do we sell? Why do threats matter? Because it actually activates the part of the brain that drives decision making. If you don't get to the primitive brain, you will never get a decision. Next, we live with pain points and we don't act on most pain points. So I don't accept sellers saying I found their pain points because they have not yet found their priority. In fact, if you put a threat next to a gain, a threat always gets priority over any kind of upside or gain that you might be selling.
Yeah, Brian, this makes me think of like caveman era, right? When it's like came down to survival, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah.
So, Kristen, based on what Brian shared about how the human brain makes a decision, how can sellers leverage neuroscience to start a buying journey?
Yeah. No, it's incredible. I mean, what Brian shared about how the human brain makes a decision, you can clearly see how sellers must follow a specific pattern in their pitch because we have to engage the primitive brain first and connect with a priority before we can talk to the rational brain. So sellers must start with answering the questions, why this and why now, before they can even get to why you. So let's talk about the framework. So the start of your priority pitch must set the pain. So this is a statement that describes the pain. It's one that your prospect should agree with. The shared belief between the seller and the prospect fosters trust. Next, you must
Because we don't
establish.
stop at pain, right? We don't buy on pain. We got to take that next level, Kristen.
Right. Well, I'm going down, right?
Right on.
So next we have to establish the threat, as Brian said. So to engage our prospect's primitive brain and become a priority, we must take that step of establishing the threat. And that's the imminent risk or consequence of not resolving the pain. And it needs to relate to something that is of utmost importance to your prospect. So only once your prospect's primitive brain is actually engaged and eliminating that threat becomes a priority to your prospect, are they finally ready to hear why you. Sellers must communicate their unique value in the construct of resolving that pain and making that threat go away. So the rest of the priority pitch ultimately describes how you uniquely do this with an emotional lift and a promise to perform. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in real life from a client that we recently helped develop their priority pitch. And this is a client we referenced in our last session. They sell essentially a service that helps increase sales, increase revenue, and utilization of private jets that are operating. And they pitch to owners and CEOs. So that's really important to think about that higher level prospect that they are looking to engage. Okay, so the pitch. First, we set the pain. So here's how that sounds. Right now, our industry's in a race to the bottom. There's too much competition fighting for fewer trips. As jet operators, we're in an era of volatility and uncertainty. Okay, great. Now, next, we need to establish that threat. So we say, some will survive, many will not. Survival comes down to how quickly we adapt to selling flights in a highly competitive market. And your current approach could be standing in the way. Ooh, very threatening. Okay, now we share our unique value. We believe thriving through uncertainty depends on creating more opportunities, vetting them faster, and booking them before others have time to act. The fast will eat the slow. All right. And now we give our promise to perform. Sentinel partners with operators who are ready to compete and need to win. Every day, we quote your fleet in your schedule against hundreds of opportunities you're not seeing. We bring you ready to fly trips to help you thrive, not just survive. Now, that is an effective priority pitch.
Very nice.
If I could add something to that, Kristen, what really I think was what stands out here is that they previously were selling too low and too late. They were selling to people where they might have been threatened by a new technology replacing some of their people, and they just couldn't get the right meetings with the right people. And by adjusting, what you've done here is it made a viable conversation for someone that transcends or is outside the noise of the actual work being done, that cares about the direction of the business. So that was very well done.
Totally. Yeah, we talked about it last week. And like you said, they were kind of going the easy way and trying to approach those gatekeepers. But at the end of the day, the threat they really make go away, those gatekeepers don't ultimately care about it to some extent, but it's not going to connect the same way that a CEO or an owner feels about their business when the looming threat is that their business could go away. So you're exactly right.
Thanks, Kristen. So now that we've established the approach, let's talk about the tools needed and why they're an important part of the priority sale.
Yeah. Great segue. So as we know, getting a meeting with a complete stranger before they're actually shopping is not easy. When we're aiming to sell up into those higher level prospects, it can be even more difficult, like we said, going higher up behind the gatekeeper. We settle for conversations with that gatekeeper, just like our client did previously. And then ultimately, they waste time and they waste resources working through these individuals with whom they cannot become a priority, right? Because the solution doesn't speak to the pain or the threat, like we just said. So sellers must commit to reaching these higher level prospects whose primitive brains they can effectively engage. The best opportunities live within their trusted communities, right? So we think about events or conferences they attend, potentially through associations or groups they're members of, even through referrals from contacts, direct or indirect, in their network that appear trusted. So when sellers reach those higher level prospects, they cannot afford to waste the opportunity. They've got one shot at it, right? So the human brain does really quick work of determining priorities. It needs to be convinced that very first time that you're trustworthy and that there is a real threat that needs to be addressed and needs to be made a priority. So sellers need the right tools to be prepared for that moment of truth, to start a buying journey when they have that opportunity. Sellers should not be relying solely on marketing tools to create demand. We love our marketing tools, but truly, marketing campaigns and materials are rarely developed with these concepts. They're typically informational or promotional, right? They focus on the why you. They do not consider how the human brain makes decisions and establishes priorities, which is by answering the why this and why now first. So we know this is kind of, usually marketing materials are designed for the rational brain, but we know that the rational brain can only really be engaged once the primitive brain has decided there is a threat that needs to be addressed.
So let's get even more specific here. Brian, what are the actual tools that sellers need to start that buying journey?
Yeah, so Kristen, what you said was really important. This idea, because nothing against marketing, but I think what you find with marketing is that you're finding people well into their buying journey. And a lot of times marketing leads create procurement moments of truth.
Yeah.
And what Chris is talking about is how can I actually start a buying journey with a complete stranger who's not actively looking for a solution, right? The example that you showed a minute ago, that's not for someone who's already looking for some type of software to help them automate. We're getting to a real root cause.
Yeah.
So what we really need are different types of tools, selling tools, to give us access. And one thing we highly recommend is thought leadership and speaking. There's not a better way or better chance for you in front of 20 to 50 to 100 of your ideal prospects at a super high level than you doing some form of thought leadership or speaking. Next, we're going to touch on access kits, which are how you help the CEO start aligning their other decision makers on the team. And you've got about 12 minutes to accomplish that. And then the third step is after that first real successful engagement where they say, this sounds great, what do we do next? You need some form of diagnostic tool to help you corral the other decision makers, align them to the priority, and then report back with a step-by-step guidance moving forward. This is really how priority sales are done moving forward. So from a thought leadership speaking approach, this is, I believe, is lead generation at the highest level. It is the best way to get in front of your ideal prospects, which I want them to be 2 levels above who you currently talk to. So we need to get to them before they even thought of a solution. Access kits, what are they? Access kits are messaging and selling tools that are designed to help the CEO introduce this idea to others on her team. And it must be a quick pitch deck, some kind of messaging, but it really addresses, to Kristen's point, why this, why now, and maybe why you? Because we're starting the buying journey. No one wants to know why I should pick you. They want to know, why are we talking about this? The third is what we call diagnostics. This helps address the what's next. So it's some kind of a guidance and supportive tool that allows us to meet all the other stakeholders to make sure they've aligned and bought in. Because even though decision makers buy in, they need others' feedback and support to move forward. In fact, the example here was with a group we worked with that the first time they deployed this diagnostic, they converted an easy $48,000 first sale to a $342,000 first sale by stopping the process, saying, let's really look at the challenge and look at where your real opportunities lie. So diagnostic tools are designed to help you get bigger opportunities, but align these large decision-making teams in a step-by-step process to move forward.
That's great, Brian. Thank you. Those tools are so valuable. We've now covered the approach and the tools. Let's talk more about the skills portion of the priority sale. Kristen, why is it important to define, to measure, and to set the targets for the skills needed for your sales team?
Yeah, great question, Ari. I mean, ultimately, to build a high-performing sales team and achieve those long-term revenue and margin growth goals, a critical first step is to assess and benchmark your current team, their skills, their capabilities, and know where you're starting from. So skills assessments ultimately provide a clear view of where each member of your team stands. It can help identify those specific areas that need improvement, both at the individual level and at the team level. So without the baseline, starting a new sales program is like navigating without a map. You might set goals, but you won't have a clear path to achieve them. So once you identify the critical skills needed and assess your team's proficiency with these skills, you can ultimately customize and develop those specific training initiatives that are needed to kind of close the gaps that exist. So this kind of targeted approach ensures that you're not wasting time on general training that doesn't address the specific individual needs. Instead, you can focus on building the skills that will make the biggest impact on your team's performance and for the individual, and then ultimately drive that greater revenue and margin over time. So now also, once you got your baseline, you've measured it, you know where to focus your training, you need to track those improvements over time. So ongoing benchmarking along the way helps you measure whether the new sales program is genuinely moving the needle. So by monitoring those individual and team progress consistently over time, you can make adjustments to your strategy and your focus. So you can maximize the effectiveness of that training. And then ultimately, you need to think of these assessments as kind of leading indicators. So ultimately, you're building the skills to ultimately drive more margin in the sale, for example, with the priority sale. And by having these leading indicators, they allow you to see, is your team on track to ultimately achieve those goals? Focusing on those gaps and delivering training where it matters tracking those improvements over time, you're not just managing sales performance, you're actively building that foundation for sustained revenue growth and profitability.
So then, Brian, what are the specific skills needed for the priority sale, and how do we help sellers improve upon them?
Yeah, I'd like to start by talking about how imperative this truly is. Wanting to gain greater margin, greater access at higher levels, we all want that. I just don't think people understand how hard this is. It's not complicated. It's actually very simple, but it's hard because we need to better prepare our sellers. We got to better equip our sellers, and we got to better develop our sellers. So what Kristen opened up here is all about how do we understand the right way to develop our human sellers. So the first thing we have to do, knowing that all growth starts with the truth, is we got to assess our people. To Kristen's point, where are they in their journey? And once we understand where they are, can we actually identify now how much revenue potential they have within them? Which I think is a mind expanding concept for sales managers. Now you know how much more revenue each and every one of your sellers can create. And then third, we can actually design their own individual growth path. We don't need to put people in training sessions that they don't need to learn. I think it's a complete waste of time. So we fundamentally believe in assessing both sellers and managers around three things: their willingness to sell, their selling DNA, as well as their tactical abilities. And this is all done through a standardized questionnaire that measures will to sell, seller beliefs, and selling skills. And when and only when we have objective data can we actually start targeting the upskillers or upskilling for our sellers. This is a simple example. A lot of data here. Green is really good, red is rough, and orange is workable. This is actually a live client friend of mine. But one of the things that, and just trust that every single thing here has insights. But what I find most fascinating is that not only can we identify the areas to improve, but we look at Jens's team here, there's another $7 million of revenue growth opportunity within his existing team. So if we now know what the potential is and we know what we need to improve and work on, now we can do something with it. And in this world that continues to accelerate faster and faster, we have to get better faster and faster. So not only can we develop with the individual, but this is how I look at entire teams. So if we had an entire team, this is the same team, that anytime where there's more than 75%-ish of people who have an issue with something, that becomes our monthly development agenda. We don't want to train on things they don't need to improve. We want to focus on the areas that create the most impact. And that is what I believe is the way to develop sellers quickly and effectively moving forward.
That's fascinating. That's awesome. Thank you, Brian. I know we're getting close to the end of our time here. Looks like we may have time for a couple of questions. So if you haven't typed your questions into the Q&A box, please do so. It looks like we have a couple already. Let's see here. This one, what types of companies have you seen this work for? I'm in the automotive supplier space, so would this work for me? Looks like Brian, maybe you want to take that one?
Yeah, yes. In fact, we have worked with groups that sell to OEMs or tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers. And that, while yes, you have your own unique specific challenges that I do understand. We all understand clearly. But the reality is, as long as there's a human seller where you have a human being that you have hired for a specific reason to create value, create margin, or even make a sale, as long as there's a human seller involved, this applies just as appropriately, right? So we don't work with B2C. This is all about B2B organizations where we have human sellers in the mix to help us explain our value, get to the right people, and win an opportunity. So even though we have a tremendous amount of industry expertise, we are targeting the brain and we're working with human sellers trying to get access. So it really applies to all.
Yeah, it's been kind of unbelievable to see how much this applies even in the most nuanced and unique spaces. Because like you said, the human brain works the same no matter what industry you're in, as long as you're selling to a human. So yeah.
From highly commoditized businesses to very complex businesses. I love both those challenges, but they are challenges in and of themselves. But there's something to solve here.
Totally. Like the highly commoditized space is amazing because we can help a company stand out and separate from a competitive set that looks the same. But like in the example we gave with this Sentinel, I mean, they developed something that didn't exist in the market. So
there you go. Yeah.
ultimately, creating demand was even more important to them because they didn't have procurement sale. They didn't have those opportunities. So totally right.
Great
Yep.
question. Yep.
Yeah.
Looks like we might have time for one more. Let's see here. Okay, great question. Again, we've explored other sales programs like Sandler in the past. What's different about the priority sale?
Yeah. Brian and I were actually talking about this the other day because there's so many different sales programs out there. And ones like Sandler especially have such a strong brand because they've been around for decades. I think you said something like 50 years. And so
50 plus years. It's an older chassis. It's a bit older for chassis. Speaking of that
Right.
manufacturing space.
So, the point here is that these programs were developed before the internet, before cell phones, and definitely before AI, right? So they're not really thinking about this modern sales world we live in and kind of what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis when we're competing for mind share and priority. So and also we've seen that most of these selling frameworks really focus on that first moment of truth, the procurement sale, right? They're really focused on when a buyer comes to you and is already shopping, when they think potentially they've already lumped you into that same category of all your competitors where you look and sound the same. They do not teach the priority sale. They don't teach that second moment of truth, which is how to access those higher level prospects and start a buying journey, which is where we know greater margins live in the sale. They also don't factor in the neuroscience components, like how do human brains really make decisions and establish priorities? And that makes sense because they're really only focused on the procurement sale. However, the other thing we thought about was, really a lot of these other selling frameworks don't address these three critical components of kind of the selling ecosystem. They don't, focus on approach, tools, and skills. Most of them, like Sandler, focus on skills solely. So, and we know this, right? Even if they have the skills, if they don't really have the right approach, if they don't have the right tools, it's not nearly as effective. And, their investment is not going to deliver the same return. So the priority sale goes well beyond that, right? It's more than just skills training. It also equips sales teams with that approach rooted in neuroscience and those tools so that sellers can ultimately kind of deliver the priority sale, right? Reach those higher level prospects and start a buying journey before a purchase is even intended. And really, it comes down to sellers being able to position themselves as those trusted advisors early on. And they do this by helping prospects to eliminate a threat, which we know is how they establish priorities. And, kind of not be stuck in this procurement sale where it's all about competing on features or price. And we know that ultimately drives a race to the bottom and kills margins. So in a nutshell, the way I'd respond to that is that the priority sale is really designed for a modern B2B selling environment and helps with a proactive approach to selling that really aligns with how buyers even want to make a purchase today.
Another great and very valid question. We are at the top of our time here, so I'll wrap up. I want to thank everyone for joining us.
Always goes fast.
I know, right? Zippity.
Get warmed up.
Yeah.
And for following us on this journey here, diving into the priority sale methodology with us. We've covered the three essential components, approach, tools, and skills today. These form the foundation of a priority pitch and learned how to engage prospects on a deeper, more instinctual level. Now, it's time to put this into practice with our priority pitch challenge. So we encourage you, we encourage you to bring this question to your team individually and compare their responses. The question is, if you only had 40 seconds with a prospect, what would you say? What you're going to see is, do you have a consistent message that will create demand from your prospect and demonstrate your unique value? See how aligned and consistent your team's messaging and response to this question is, and submit your pitches to marketing@therevcollective.com by December 17th. Everyone who participates will receive a copy of The Priority Sale, co-authored by Brian Gray. And please do not miss our next session. Your sales and marketing efforts are unintentionally collapsing your margins. Happening
Wow.
Tuesday, November 9th.
It's true. I was like,
On the note.
It'll be an exciting, a dramatic one. No, it's going to be another very, I think, fruitful and actionable session. That'll be next Tuesday, November 19th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. So for this session, we'll uncover how oversaturation, data-driven competition, and prospect fatigue are eroding your margins. These are all the things that are happening in the sales environment right now, and how you can reclaim your unique value in this crowded market. So thank you once again to our panelists, Kristen and Brian, for sharing your expertise, and to each of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing your priority pitch submissions and to welcoming you back for our next session.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
thanks,
you all.
everybody.
Bye.